Kia ora everybody. I have rather a lot to get through today, so I will allow a bit of extra time at the end for questions. Cabinet met earlier to discuss further reprioritisation of the government's work programme. The government is focused on the bread and butter issues, the things that matter most to New Zealanders, and at the moment the cost of living and the recovery from Cyclone Gabrielle are right at the top of the list. Stopping some of our plans and putting others on a slower track gives us the bandwidth to focus on these immediate priorities, while also saving some money so that we can provide a little bit of extra support to help families with increasing costs. It'll also help to keep downward pressure on any domestic-related inflation. I want New Zealanders to know that the government's doing its bit and is cutting its cloth to suit the times that we are in. Some of the things that we're delaying or stopping do mean a lot to us as a government, but we're taking the hard decisions because we know that Kiwis are also making some tough calls at the moment as well. A month ago, I announced our first tranche of reprioritisations, and today I can announce the second. Cumulatively, they save over $1 billion that is now available for reallocation to support New Zealanders with the cost of living. We also know that we face big bills to fix parts of the transport network that have been decimated under Cyclone Gabrielle. It will be a massive task for our road builder, Waka Kotahi, and one that needs their total focus. As such, the Transport Minister, Michael Wood, has proposed a number of reprioritisations within the transport portfolio, which I'm confirming today. First, we'll be stopping the implementation of the Clean Car Upgrade Scheme, where households would have been able to scrap their old cars in return for a grant for a cleaner vehicle or to pay for public transport. Trials of the scheme have already proven to be difficult, and it's not clear that this is the most effective way to increase the uptake of low-emissions vehicles. The $568 million allocated to that scheme will now be freed up to invest in cost-of-living measures. We're also refocusing our goal of increasing and improving public transport as an alternative to driving. We'll be focusing on the 5 main centres of Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, Wellington and Christchurch, where there is the scale for decent public transport alternatives to getting around, rather than seeking to direct every council in New Zealand to make these changes. Reducing transport emissions is critical to achieving New Zealand's climate change targets, but we need to focus our efforts on the areas where we can achieve the greatest reductions, and that's in our biggest cities. In other regions, pressing on with regional vehicle kilometres travelled targets doesn't make sense when many of those areas don't have good alternative bus networks or trains. So we're making these targets voluntary in areas like Dunedin, Palmerston North, Rotorua, New Plymouth, and those places that have been affected by Cyclone Gabrielle, such as Napier, Hastings and Gisborne. To be clear, in our major centres we do intend to keep investing in regular, fast and affordable public transport so that people have choices about how to get around, our roads are less congested and we are reducing our emissions. It's good for the environment, it reduces congestion, it improves productivity, and it's also good for our international brand. Third, we will be significantly narrowing the speed reduction program to focus on the most dangerous 1% of state highways. We'll also ensure that where changes proposed, Waka Kotahi are consulting meaningfully with the affected communities. That means that speed limits will reduce in the places where there have been the highest numbers of deaths and injuries. We'll continue to make targeted reductions in the areas immediately around schools and marae and in small townships that state highways run through. We'll also be stopping the social leasing car scheme trials. That scheme was designed to provide leasing arrangements to low-income families for clean cars, but again it was proving difficult to implement, and several of the communities where it was due to be trialled have been affected by the recent weather. So that will save $19 million, which will also be available to be reallocated. Finally, on transport, I can confirm today that we will be staging the way we roll out transport projects in Auckland. With around a third of New Zealand's population estimated to live in our biggest city, It's where we can make the largest single gains in future-proofing transport systems to tackle congestion and to reduce emissions. Work on Auckland Light Rail will be continuing alongside other city-shaping investments, such as the second Waitemata Harbour crossing, more rapid busways, and better connections to growth areas like the Northwest. But just like the London Underground didn't suddenly appear fully formed, in fact it took generations to develop, Auckland Light Rail will happen in stages, with the first stage expected to be confirmed by the middle of this year. There isn't anything new in taking a stage approach to significant transport projects in New Zealand. The Wellington Northern Corridor and the Northern Busway projects, for example, are being delivered in successive stages by successive governments. The Waikato Expressway started in 1993 with the Bombay Hills to Mercer construction, and it was only finished late last year. Auckland Light Rail is no different. Staging the rollout will align it with other critical transport investments, particularly the second Waitemata Harbour crossing. Investing in a modern Auckland where people can get around, where there's less congestion and cleaner travel options is the least that we should expect. And our Cabinet is absolutely agreed on that. Justice Minister Kerry Allen has also sought to reprioritise some elements of the Justice Work Programme. We've decided to defer receiving advice on the second phase of alcohol reform that related to issues such as sponsorship, advertising and pricing. That's being pushed back to April 2024 rather than March this year. These are areas that we do need to take the time to investigate properly so that we can ensure that there aren't unintended consequences. For example, when community groups are doing it tough, I don't want to see any restrictions on sponsorship increasing costs for community sports teams. The changes we are already making around how locals participate in alcohol licensing decisions will be continuing. I can also confirm that we are not intending to introduce legislation to lower the voting age for general elections to 16. There is a process set out for how Parliament will respond to the recent Supreme Court decision, and we will continue to pursue that. But in terms of legislation, we will be introducing legislation to lower the voting age in local body elections. Lowering the voting age to 16 for general elections requires the support of at least 75% in the House of Representatives or a successful binding referendum. It is clear that we do not have a 75% majority in the current Parliament to make that change. Lowering the voting age to 16 for local elections requires a regular majority in the House through amendments to the Local Government Act. Giving the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds is something that I do support and I'm happy to see progressed. I also acknowledge that there's greater support in Parliament for lowering the voting age for local government elections, and that's why we have decided to focus on that now. Our intention is to introduce the legislation for that this term and see it considered by the next Parliament. The Minister for the Environment, David Parker, has proposed that we defer work on the container return scheme that would see small refunds for those returning containers. The evidence overseas shows that this does help to reduce waste. However, it's also estimated to add small additional costs to households, and we don't want to be imposing those additional costs right at the moment. This policy does remain on the agenda, and we will look to assess it again in the future when the time is right to do so. Finally, we'll be deferring public consultation on a new test to determine who is a contractor and who is an employee. A recent employment court case found that Uber drivers were employees rather than contractors. That is a significant court ruling, and it has implications for the legal definition of a contractor. So rather than pushing ahead with our proposed consultation on changes, we'll be putting that work on hold until the appeals in that case have been heard. All of the changes announced today and the previous ones make just over $1 billion in savings that can be allocated to other measures. That's in addition to the over $700 million in savings that we reallocated to fund petrol excise reductions and half-price public transport that have been extended through until the end of June. That's $1.7 billion in savings that represents the clear intent of the government to focus on the issues that matter the most to New Zealanders right now, including supporting people through the current cost of living pressure. It doesn't mean that there aren't more areas that we'll continue to look at. My expectation is that ministers will continue to prioritise their own work programs as part of their business as usual jobs, including rescoping and amending those plans where necessary. These are not the only things that we're doing, and today I'm announcing that Cabinet has decided to inflation adjust payments so that all of our superannuitants will receive an inflation increase of 7.22% to their annual payments from the 1st of April this year. We know it's vital that the superannuitant's income doesn't go backwards. This will see a couple who are both over the age of 65 receive $102 more a fortnight, and a single person living alone receive an extra $66 a week more. Benefit levels will also increase from the 1st of April by 7.22%. That means that a family on a benefit with children will receive an extra $40 a week, and a sole parent will receive an extra $31 a week, as we continue our work to reduce child poverty. In total, since we've been in government, beneficiaries with children are on average $190 a week better off, increasing to $222 a week when they're receiving the winter energy payment over the coldest 6 months of the year. In a cost of living crisis, we can't leave behind those on the lowest incomes who rely on the government for support. I know that every little bit helps when it comes to making ends meet. I'm very proud of the work the government's done this year to support New Zealanders through difficult times, keeping the price of petrol down, extending half-price public transport, and significantly boosting the minimum wage are all doing their bit to help families. Today's decisions highlight our absolute focus on the cost of living and recovering from the cyclone. We're reducing costs to households whilst freeing up our work program so that we can be most focused on those other immediate issues. Very quickly to the week ahead, I'm in Wellington through to Wednesday. I'll be chairing the Intelligence and Security Committee meeting annual review on Wednesday, as well as showing my support for the kiwi fruit industry by attending the annual Zespri function here at Parliament. On Thursday, I will be in Gisborne, and I'm hoping for third time lucky in my attempts to visit Wairoa. And then on Saturday, I'll be at the Pacifica Festival in Auckland. And with that, I'm happy to open up for questions. And while you ask a long question, I'll just get a glass of water.
Prime Minister, how can you justify culling climate policies in the current climate?
That question needed to be longer. Look, I need to put these things in perspective. The climate policies that we're talking about today would have made a very small contribution to our overall emissions reductions targets. Our emissions reduction targets have not changed. So where we are making changes that potentially mean that we have to find savings in other areas, then that's what we'll do. But to put this into perspective, across the the clean car upgrade social leasing schemes that we've announced today we're not going to be progressing with, we'd be talking around 7,000 tonnes of reductions during the first emissions budget period. To put that into context, we're aiming to reduce emissions by about 1.2 million during that same period through the GIDI scheme and about 183,000 through the state sector decarbonisation work. So these were relatively small contributions. If we look at the overall level of investment required to achieve those, there are actually better ways of achieving emissions reductions.
Scrapping that cash for clunkers scheme, you've rated the climate emergency fund to pay for a cost of living measure. Is that even legit?
Obviously, you'll see how all of this shakes out when we release the budget in terms of where the reallocation of spending is going.
Are you allowed to do that?
As I've said, you'll see how that all works out when we release the budget back in May.
Tell us today whether you're allowed to do that or not.
Look, as I've indicated, we'll show you exactly how the flow of money goes when we release the budget in May. Jason,
how did your support partners, the Green Party, react to this when you told them?
I had a meeting with them this morning. Obviously, we went through these in the context of a whole range of discussions. There are areas in this where they have a difference of opinion with the government, and I expect that they will articulate that. But our working relationship continues to be a very constructive one.
Is it still your opinion, just like Jacinda Ardern's, that climate change is your nuclear-free moment?
Look, as I've indicated, our emissions reductions budgets have not changed. We're still intending to continue to reduce
It sends
emissions.
a message that your government doesn't care about
No,
climate change.
it doesn't. It sends a message that the government is absolutely focused on reducing emissions in the most efficient way possible and in the best way possible that doesn't unnecessarily increase the costs to households.
As recently as this weekend on Q&A, you were talking about increasing electric car uptake. How else are you incentivising electric cars now that you've dumped the clean
Well, the
car
current
uptake?
scheme that we have in place has actually proven to be far more successful than early estimates had suggested. So we're already reducing emissions by a greater amount through the current incentive schemes that we've got in place for clean car uptake.
But those
Yeah.
incentive schemes are unsustainable.
It was supposed to be rolled out, the trial was supposed to be rolled out in April, that's 3 weeks away. How much have you progressed towards that start date? And it was also supposed to take about 181,000 cars off the road to reduce emissions equivalent to 181,000 cars off the road by 2035. How will you make up for that?
As I've indicated, it was already going to prove to be very difficult to get that scheme up and running and delivered in the timetable that we had previously been talking about. As I've indicated, we're talking about around 7,000 tonnes that would be reduced. There are other ways that we're going to be able to make up that level of emissions reduction. So we'll work through that process. We'll have further announcements on that in due course.
What are those other ways? You've extended fuel tax cuts, you've got rid of the biofuels mandate, you've taken out the climate bits from the government policy statement on transport, you've got today's announcements, but you have not announced any new climate policies since becoming Prime Minister.
Well,
how will you do that?
watch this space. As I've indicated, though, some of the things that we're talking about here, let's consider the Giddy scheme, for example, 1.2 million tonnes in emissions reductions during that first budgeted period. The state sector decarbonisation scheme, 183,000 tonnes being reduced in the first budget period through those. Those things are continuing. And of course, within those, we'll look for further opportunities as well, as we'll continue to do in the transport space too. As I've indicated, we've actually got some other areas of success in the transport space, including the fact that we've had a greater uptake of electric vehicles than we had anticipated at this point. So we'll continue to look for how we can progress more of that faster. Claire.
Do you have any more details on the Auckland Light Rail and just how far you're expecting to go and how it might be staggered out, how long it might take to get it all done, if you're still going to do it all?
So there is a process that we're underway with at the moment, which will see more details emerging in the next couple of weeks, couple of months, as part of the business case planning process, which will give a bit more indication, including things such as the potential routes, potential timing and sequencing and so on. So you'll see more detail of that. But I do want to make sure that people understand when we're talking about the billions of dollars potentially that could be invested in this, these are not investments that are going to happen in the next few years. These are investments that are going to happen over a very long period of time. Brent.
How useful will that project be if you go so far, stop and wait for the next stage to be? Seems to me it was designed on the idea that it was going all the way through the airport.
Obviously, that's part of the business case process. So basically, they'll be looking at the best way to stage it, and that'll include things such as making sure that they're considering patronage and usability of the new system within those considerations.
Claire. The other Auckland projects, are they likely to now be take longer, or do the timeframes remain roughly where they are now?
Sorry, what was that?
The other Auckland projects, like the Waitemata Harbour crossing and the east thing.
We haven't made decisions on that, but what I would say is the Waitemata Harbour crossing is something that's been raised with me almost, the second crossing is something that's been raised with me in almost every visit that I've been to Auckland. I acknowledge that for the Auckland community, this is a priority for them. And so, we'll certainly be considering that in subsequent future decisions that we make around Auckland transport.
What is your plan to meet the emissions reduction targets?
Well, we've already set out quite a lot of detail in terms of our emissions reductions plans. In terms of the offsetting of any changes that we've made, we'll consider those and we'll release those plans in due course. Well, as we make those decisions.
When
Why are you doing this? Are you doing this because you think it's what Kiwis want?
No, we're doing it because we've weighed a variety of things about whether it's a priority right now, whether it's the best way to achieve the emissions reductions targets. As I've indicated, for the cost involved, the two car schemes that I just mentioned had a very high level of cost for a relatively small emissions reduction.
The refocus on bread and butter issues. Are you doing that because you think it's what Kiwis want you to do?
No, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of making sure that we're actually focused on the things that are most important to New Zealanders at the moment. It's a focus on making sure that the things that we are doing are deliverable within the timeframes that we're doing them. It's a focus on making sure that we can actually meet the immediate needs that we've got in front of us. And the cyclone and the recent natural disasters have actually put new pressures on us that we have to be able to meet.
Which New Zealanders are you doing this from? Because in terms of these changes, there's going to be a lot of young New Zealanders who will have to pick up either the debt or the exchange emissions reductions. You're also removing possibly the right for them to vote. What about young New Zealanders? So, look, as I've indicated, we're not changing our emissions reductions budgets. We are making some changes to how we'll go about achieving those budgets. In terms of the voting age, I'll be clear, I support a lower voting age, the age of 16. There isn't a parliamentary majority for that, so I don't intend to progress a bill that's doomed to fail, because ultimately that would be an expensive exercise to simply make a political statement, and I'm not willing to do that.
When you say watch this space on those improved meeting the budget, is that going to happen in the budget, or are you going to bring it forward so that people can be sure of your commitment to meeting those targets, or what?
Look, you'll see more announcements from us in the climate change space in due course. I'm not going to set particular dates and times for when that's going to happen, but there is more to come in that space, clearly.
It's worse, will you just kick it down the road again?
Sorry, what was that?
If inflation gets worse and there's a bigger pressures on cost of living, will you just kick climate change down the road again?
Look, I kind of reject the overall assertion within your question that that's necessarily what we're doing. I don't think we're kicking the can down the road. I think what we're doing is making sure that what we're delivering is deliverable and is actually going to achieve what we're setting out to do.
Low-income whānau with the social car leasing program hard to implement. Is that because the ministry did not know how to access those low-income communities to get this up and running?
Clearly the advice that we had was that it was proving to be difficult to implement and that it was unlikely to be implementable in the timetable that had been set out for it. I want to acknowledge that when it comes to upgrading our vehicle fleet, there are still some equity challenges ahead of us. The schemes that were set out as part of our way of dealing with some of those equity issues weren't necessarily going to hit the target, and that was the feedback that we were getting. So we'll go back to the drawing board and we will look at other ways to achieve that.
Was it that they weren't able to be implemented? It was difficult to implement, that's what you've said, but whose fault is that?
Well, some of it was a difficult concept in order to be able to implement. Jason?
You've talked at length about this reprioritization, how much money you're going to have from this reprioritization. Do you have any details about what this money is going to be spent on, and if not, when can we expect some clarity?
Like I said, that will come in the budget.
So we can expect this
money gets fed back through the budget process, and how that money gets spent will become very clear in the budget, and that will include showing exactly how it relates to the different components of the budget. And I don't want to preempt that because I'm not going to announce the budget today.
When people are dealing with the impact of the cyclone now, would it not be more prudent to at least tell people or give some sort of indication about how this money is going to be spent now, rather than waiting for a big flashy announcement at the budget?
Well, no, we're not going to be announcing the budget now, and we're still working through the overall implications of the cyclone and the recent weather event on the government's budget. And as I indicated yesterday, it is likely to have a significant impact on the budget and on the overall budget priorities.
Is this actually...
You said you're focused on the bread and butter issues. How much is a slab of bread and a slab of butter?
A slab? Well, it depends how you define a slab. If you go to Pack and Save in Upper Hutt to buy a loaf of Molenberg toast bread, you'll be paying around $4, maybe $4.50. If you're looking for a block of butter, it'd be around $7. Can I give you others? 2 litres of milk, you might be paying about $4.50 for 2 litres of milk, depending on whether you're buying a branded version or a no-frills version. Any others?
Clearly expecting that question.
I do my own supermarket shopping, and so I can tell you these things.
Sorry, I've just actually got to follow.
So I will let you follow that question up.
Well, it should follow. It's another question from me. But you have now been in this job a wee while, and you have previously not ruled out the super age. Can you now rule out increasing super?
Look, it's not something that I have even turned my mind to at this point. The government's position is what the government's position is. If we were to change that, we would do that in the general election campaign. We certainly are not going to be doing that in the next few months.
Luke,
up the back.
I mean, is this, particularly in the sort of climate area, is this an acknowledgement that really some of these flashier climate policies were pretty poorly designed and just not very good value for money in the first place?
I think there's a lot happening in the climate space. And one of the things that I'm very focused on is making sure that what we're doing is delivering the best bang for buck and is actually deliverable. I'm not going to say that they're necessarily poorly designed, but there's a lot that we're doing. And one of the things that I want to do is make sure that, potentially we might be narrowing down the number of things that we do and doing the things that we are going to do more thoroughly and better.
When you've been out and about, have many people griped or sort of moaned to you about the reduction of speed limits?
It hasn't actually come up a huge amount, but I think it's more of a localised issue to some areas where it's been a particularly noisy topic.
And with that in mind, with State Highway 35 as an example, around Te Tairāwhiti, where they have forestry, reducing the speed limit is one way of, and that's great, but it's actually the number of trucks on the road that's giving the headaches to those locals and those communities. So are you going to do those things as well? Is it going to be an and, or is the speed limit reduction just the one-stop shop?
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to go and look at State Highway 35 in person yet, but what I can say around that, and from terms of what I know about State Highway 35, is I think one of the biggest issues there is that it sits beneath a very steep cliff face, which is proving to be very unstable in extreme weather. And so that means we have to look at how we can make that road more resilient. We've dealt with this before, so the Kaikoura earthquake showed that there were parts of that road, again along the coast, that were pretty unstable and pretty vulnerable, and a lot of work has been done to make them more resilient. We're going to have similar conversations around State Highway 35.
So how do you expect Māori to respond or react to the question that you were asked yesterday on Q&A? Is it a choice to send, do you have a choice to send tamariki to kura kaupapa? Is it a choice to drink clean water? How do you expect Māori to take that kind of question to you, Prime Minister?
Well, ultimately, it's probably more a question for the questioner. I can only answer the questions that are put in front of me. I don't necessarily think that that's a legitimate comparison. Clearly, we want to have Māori to have the choice around education, and whether they go to an English, driven, programmed school or one that's in Māori. They should have that choice.
Saying that was a race-based question. That what the reporter was asking you was, is there a difference in co-governance, kura kaupapa versus drinking water? A choice to send children to kura kaupapa, no choice to drink water. He was making a race-based comparison. That is what the kōrero is around.
Well, that's ultimately a matter for you to take up with the person who asked the question. I'm not going to provide a running commentary on the quality of all of your questions. That would be a dangerous thing for me to do. Let's come over the back here.
Just on the speed limits, can you tell us where these areas are that are still going to get the reductions?
So it'll be the top 1%. So those roads where we've seen the biggest challenges. I want to be clear here that speed limit reductions are only one of the features of the overall work program to improve the safety of our roads. We've significantly increased the funding for roading resilience and roading safety improvements, whether that's widening roads, removing corners, putting in wire rope barriers or solid rope barriers, doing all of those things. Our work on those will continue as well. What we're talking about here is just narrowing down the speed limit work to the 1% of the most dangerous roads.
But can you tell us where those are?
I'm sure the Minister of Transport will be able to give you some greater breakdown of that.
Is this the bulk of your policy reset done now? Putting aside Three Waters, is this it basically done?
Look, in terms of this process that we've gone through, yes. As I've indicated before, though, every government, every year, should be doing regular reprioritisation as part of its annual budgeting process, and we'll continue to do that.
Pivot very quickly, just for a moment, to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in the US. What risk is there, if any, to New Zealand?
So the advice that we've got at the moment is that New Zealand banks are in a good financial position, that we haven't got any immediate risks in that space. I mean, obviously that's within the mandate of the Reserve Bank to continue to make sure they're vigilantly monitoring that. The feedback that they're giving us is that we haven't got concerns in that space. But there's still always a need for us to continue to look at these areas. We've got the deposit takers legislation before Parliament at the moment, which is again just designed to make sure that while we don't have an immediate risk, that we're thinking ahead to where future risks might emerge.
Yeah, are regulations strong enough, strict enough to prevent something like that happening here?
As I've said, our banks at the moment, the feedback we've got is that they're in a good position to be able to weather the current economic storm. But we should always be looking to how we can continue to make sure that we're upholding the integrity of our financial institutions. The deposit takers legislation is one of the things that we've got in that space.
Right now, yeah.
What was that?
So, decent profits of the banks, good thing right now then, yeah?
Nice pivot. But I'm not going to endorse the levels of profits that the banks are making, if that's what you're asking me to do.
Yeah. Thousands of teachers and principals are walking off the job this week. Are you comfortable with the offers that are on the table at the moment, and do you think that it addresses teacher to student ratios enough?
I've got a little bit of experience with teacher bargaining, and I've generally found that it doesn't work very well when you do it through the media. But what I would say on that is, I'd encourage the teachers and the Ministry of Education to get back around the table. We did the pay increases that teachers have already seen under this government are sort of double what they received under the 9 years of the previous government. So it does show that we value teachers. It does show that we're willing to work with them to address the issues that they're grappling with. Not all of the issues that are on the table in terms of the public discussion are ones that get dealt with through collective bargaining. So things like class size, for example, that isn't actually part of the collective bargaining process. So my overall message is just to both parties to continue to get around the table and work through those issues. Not all of them will be addressed through this bargaining round.
And it's March 15 on Wednesday. How will you be acknowledging that?
Look, we've had some conversations with the community about how they want, the community affected by March 15, about how they most want to see that event remembered. And there are a variety of views within that community around how they want to do that. We will acknowledge it, but we haven't completely locked down exactly how we're going to do that yet.
Prime Minister, are you able to give us a little bit of a snapshot of your relationship with the Green Party right now? I mean, they campaigned very heavily for Make It 16. Chloe Swarbrick is pushing through the alcohol amendments, the clean car discount scheme, and you've basically just given them a very public middle finger, essentially. So what's your relationship with the Greens right now?
I completely reject the assertion in your question. But in terms of my relationship with the Greens, as I said, I met with James and Marama this morning. I have a very good working relationship with both of them. But we recognise we're coming into an election. There will be areas, and increasing numbers of areas, where we will agree to disagree. We're not the same party. We're different parties. We'll be campaigning on different issues. I'm absolutely confident that we'll continue to work together until the election, and that after the election, if we are in the position to continue to work together, that we will be able to do so.
What was their reaction when you broke this news to them?
Oh, look, we had a really positive conversation. I'm not going to get into a blow-by-blow account for that. They can share their own reactions to the announcement that I have made today, and I'm sure that they will. But what I can say is that our working relationship is in very good working order. I'll come up the back.
Why did you go for climate policies? And in any of your reprioritisation discussions, did you look at big, expensive, ineffective policies like fees-free or KiwiBuild?
Look, I wouldn't characterise fees-free as a big and ineffective policy in terms of cost of living. In terms of cost of living, in terms of the financial pressure that a lot of young New Zealanders are facing, it's easing some of the financial pressure that they're facing. But yes, in answer to the main thrust of your question, have we been spanning our net wide in terms of what we've been looking at? Yes, we have.
Why didn't you scrap KiwiBuild?
In terms of KiwiBuild, you will already find that a lot of our focus on the housing area has already over the last 5 years refocused into other areas. There is still a role for KiwiBuild, but it will not be of the size and scale that was it will not be of the size and scale that was initially envisaged.
So has some of that money already been reprioritised out of there then?
That money will still go to housing. Ben.
Just back on the Christchurch mosque attack. You've just said that you haven't completely locked down exactly how you're going to acknowledge it. It's 28 hours away. I mean, what do you mean?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll be acknowledging it from Wellington, so to be clear, I'm not going to be going to Christchurch for it on Wednesday. There are as you know, there are a range of ways in Wellington that we can acknowledge these sorts of events. We haven't and it won't be at a large scale because the community have indicated they don't want that. But we'll just talk to them about how best they want it acknowledged.
And just on another issue, the only other area that I can think of that you flagged reprioritisation or a big policy shift is Three Waters / co-governance. So when will you sort of explain what the, quote, air quotes, co-governance agenda or what your government's co-governance plan will be?
Yeah, as I've indicated before, we are working through the Three Waters stuff as quickly as we can. It will be a matter of weeks rather than months, and then people will know what to expect from us on that.
So
Yes.
does the Christchurch core work fit in your work programme at the moment? Is it a priority for you?
It remains one of our international priorities. So in terms of our international relations program, it certainly remains a priority for us. We've made some commitments around that. We definitely want to see those through. And actually, in terms of New Zealand's leadership role globally, New Zealand is seen as having taken a really positive global leadership role here, and I want to make sure that we're seeing that through.
Do you care about it as much as Jacinda Ardern did?
Of course. As I've indicated in the weekend, we're different people. And actually, there's potential for Jacinda Ardern to continue to be involved in that work. And, in due course, we'll explore what that might look like.
You've done
You're offering Jacinda Ardern a job.
I'm not doing that right now, no.
Indicated she's interested in doing that.
Look, as I've indicated, there may be an opportunity for her to continue to be involved in that work. Yeah.
You've done a lot of axing of things since you became Prime Minister. What does your government, what do you stand for besides responding to the cost of living crisis? What do you want to do as the leader of the country?
As I made it really clear, I set some of this out the very first day that I stood on the forecourt. I want to make sure that New Zealand is a country where people who go out there and strive and work hard are able to get ahead and feel like they're making progress. And I know that for a lot of families, they're not feeling that way at the moment. I want to make sure that we are enshrining the promise of social mobility, that basically you can work hard and you can improve your lot in life and you can create a better future for yourself and for your children. I want to make sure that we're actually living up to our clean green credentials because I think that is something that New Zealanders are proud of. And some of the work that we've been doing in this space has actually been running the rule over the programs that we've been doing and saying, are these actually going to deliver the sorts of gains, the sorts of changes that New Zealanders are expecting of us? Joe.
Families get just to follow on that. That's very well-meaning things that you've just talked about there, but can you actually break down what I guess is left on the policy agenda that is a Chris Hipkins government that isn't bread and butter stuff in terms of putting money in people's pockets? Like, if people are going to look back and go, what did Chris Hipkins do, and say that was a progressive policy or that was something Labor and the Greens did, what is it?
Yeah, look, as I've said, most of the focus that here, in terms of the things that I've been announcing, have been around reprioritisation. Reprioritisation opens up space for other things to happen. We haven't announced much of that yet, and you'll see more of that in the budget.
No, but also, presumably the budget is going to be pretty tight, which has already been indicated by the Finance Minister a lot, because you're back in the situation where you've got cyclone recovery, it's obviously a cost of living crisis, and we hear a lot about bread and butter. So are you really going to have the bandwidth, to use your term, to actually be able to do a whole bunch of things that people will go, oh, that's Chris Hipkins doing a Chris Hipkins government thing?
Well, of course, I'm aiming for us to have at least 3 more years after this where we can do a range of things as well. I'm not going to give you the budget right now.
Okay,
next question.
Just on that answer. So what you're saying is that what you're doing between now and the election is doing what you can to get yourself back into government. You're not actually going to announce things because people might not like them.
Well,
you're just going to do bread and butter, cost of living crisis related stuff, get yourself back in for another term, and then go, oh, well, we might do something.
We set out about 28 pages of things that we're doing in this in my statement to Parliament at the beginning of the year. I appreciate many people don't wade their way through that, but it is quite specific and it sets out an awful lot of things that the government's going to be doing this year.
How can families get ahead if they're... I'll ask for examples.
Like I've said, there's 28 pages of them. Yeah.
How can families get ahead if their houses are underwater and you're not going to do anything about climate change?
I completely reject that.
The
Yeah.
16 campaign actually wanted the local government voting age to be lowered prior to anything in government anyway. Should that have not just been done in the first place?
Look, I'm focused forward and I'm outlining what the government's program is from this point onwards.
Disagree
Yeah.
with
Just
Jacinda
on the,
Ardern? Did you
just on the
disagree with Jacinda
unintended
Ardern when she brought that to
consequences of the
cabinet then?
alcohol reform?
Yeah.
Can you explain the risk or the level of risk that you've been advised as far as, say, community sport or people having to pay more with sponsorship going down?
Well, that's one of the things, that there isn't good, robust evidence base for what the potential flow-on consequences of this will be. It's one of the reasons that we're allowing more time for that process is so that we can make informed decisions about that. Bearing in mind, too, that many of these decisions are made by the Parliament rather than by the government. There's a history of these being conscience votes in Parliament. So the more that we can do to provide all members of Parliament with a solid evidence base when they make those decisions, I think the better. We are allowing an extra year. That extra year will allow that information to be collected, that analysis to be done, and then the Parliament can make more informed decisions.
I mean that the reform's been rushed then?
Look, as I've said, I think we need a bit more time. I think we need to do this carefully and in a considered way.
So
Yeah.
you've kicked back the hate speech stuff as well. What does Kitty Allen have left to do in her justice portfolio?
Oh, look, she's going to be very busy in the justice portfolio. As if you indicate, look, again, go back and have a look at the statement to Parliament, which I didn't bring with me, but it lists out the priorities for the year, and there are plenty of priorities in the justice portfolio, plenty of areas where we will continue to be progressing.
When that Make It 16 decision was brought to Cabinet to draft legislation, did you oppose it then and say that it was doomed to fail and you didn't want to waste your time?
Well, as you know, Jenna, the Cabinet conversations are confidential and Cabinet collective responsibility applies, and it continues to apply even when there's a change of leadership.
Change of heart, or did you raise opposition then?
As I've indicated, Cabinet collective responsibility applied then and it applies now.
But your
Luke.
responsibility continues throughout that. So you were a Cabinet Minister then, party to that discussion, and now you're the Prime Minister. Did you have a change of heart, or does your position remain the same?
Same answer to the one I just gave.
Prime Minister, presumably in the wake of the Rob Campbell business, the Chief Executive of Tipu Kinga, Peter Winder, sent a note to all staff, including academics, saying, as a Crown entity, Tipu Kinga and all of our people are public servants. That means we have obligations of confidentiality, neutrality, and separating our personal views from our professional roles. Is it appropriate to send a note out like that to a tertiary institution where, like freedom of conscience and expression and all that sort of thing?
The government hasn't made changes to the provisions in the Education and Training Act around academic freedom, which does afford academics a different position in terms of their ability to criticise the government. It's one that I'll continue to always defend. I think it's important that they have the ability to do that. I haven't seen the particular communication in concern, but I will completely reiterate the government's support for the role of academics as critic and conscience of society. And so much as there's plenty of people that will offer an ongoing criticism of the government, I'll invite them to continue to do that because I do think it's an important part of a functioning democracy.
So they shouldn't regard themselves as public servants, per se?
Yes, they're public servants, but they have a special position, and that includes as a critic and conscience of society and the freedom to be able to criticise government. All right, last question over there.
Just on the High Court decision around the vaccine mandate and family caregivers. So that decision came out on Friday and published today. Have you had time to look over that?
I haven't had a chance to read it. As I've indicated over the weekend, vaccine mandates, decisions around vaccine are some of the most difficult that we've grappled with over the last couple of years as part of our COVID-19 response. And I acknowledge that overall the courts have upheld the decisions that we've taken, but they have pointed out some areas where they disagreed or where they thought the process could have been better and so on. I want to take the time to review that decision because I acknowledge the issues that have been raised in it. I want to take the time to review that decision before I give a detailed comment on it. I want to give the people who took that court case the justice of doing that, and then I'll make a comment on it. I absolutely intend to do that. I haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. Right, thanks everybody.